Welcome back, Wargamers. Today I'm going to show you how I make arrows for my bases and models. This is a Arthur model from Saxon Miniatures, and I'm just going to run through how I made these arrows. They're a little bit time consuming, but I think they produce a pretty decent effect, and you can use these for both historical miniatures as well as fantasy models, and they have a wide range of uses. So starting off, what I start out with to make the actual arrow shafts are sewing pins, which you can get from any hobby store, and I go for the ones with the smallest diameter. Don't want big, thick pins, or else it won't look like a realistic arrow shaft. So once I have these pins, I cut them a little less than half. And I vary the length sometimes, especially if I'm making arrows for bases so that it looks like they're sunk farther into the ground. So there's a little bit of a difference between the arrows. But here I go for a little less than half, and that will be the basis of our arrow. And then to work with it, I just stick it into here, a piece of cork board. I find it's easier to deal with it when it's kind of put in place like that. And now we're going to make the fletching for the arrows. And I've used the plastic that comes from like blister packs before, but I want to try and use paper here because I want to try and kind of cut into the paper to kind of show the individual feathers. I'm going to get mixed results with that, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But that was my main reason for using paper. So I cut out little diamonds out of the paper, as you will see here, and I originally tried measuring them out exactly and found it was almost a waste of time. It took so long. So instead I kind of just eyeballed it. They're about 1 millimeter or 2 in size. And so I'll put a glob of here, some gel super glue onto the ends of the pins here. And then you'll just take yourself some tweezers, grab that tiny piece of paper, and fit it onto the end. Now this looks really tricky, and it will take a few arrows for you to get the hang of it, but the gel super glue really does grab that paper pretty well, and you can use your tweezers or a hobby knife to kind of move around that piece of paper like I'm doing here to get that fletching in the correct angle that you want. I'm here going to put three pieces of fletching on per arrow. Each are kind of like, I don't know, I guess 120 degrees from one another, equidistant. And I try and get as close as I can. I don't fuss with it too much, just so that it looks like a realistic arrow. And so now I'm cutting out another piece of fletching. I'm just kind of eyeballing it to give it a similar shape to the first. If they're not exact, you really can't tell from a few feet away. This isn't a display model, so I'm kind of cutting off some time by just eyeballing the different shapes for the fletching. And so I put some more glue onto my pin, and I'm going to attach the paper again with my tweezers here, and then gently kind of knock it into position so that's at the correct angle that I want it to be so it looks realistic. And here is the third and final piece of fletching for this arrow. Same thing, just cut it out of paper with my hobby knife here, making a small little diamond, and then going to add it to the arrow with some tweezers and of course some super glue. And once you attach that final piece of fletching, you have a few minutes until the super glue dries to push around the different pieces of fletching to get them at the correct angle that you want. So once they're on, you still have some workable time. And then just to kind of protect the fletching, because it is just paper, I'm going to coat it with a thin layer of the liquid super glue to make it a little more rigid for the next part, in which I'm going to attempt to cut into the paper to give the fletching kind of look like individual feathers, which is what I'm going to show here. So once that super glue has dried, I'm just going to take my hobby knife and run it across the top of the fletching, moving it kind of back and forth in this motion to make little cuts into the top to simulate individual feathers. I had tried this before using the plastic from blister packs, and it didn't work very well. The plastic kept bending, it wasn't rigid enough. So I was hoping taking this paper and covering it with the super glue would be a better material for this, but only slightly. It still took forever to simulate these individual pieces of feather, and I don't think it was really worth the time. I only did a few arrows using this method until I just gave up and decided I was just going to paint on the individual feathers. I'm still looking for a material that can be used more realistically for the fletching. I guess if you're doing a display piece and you really want to spend hours and hours and hours in doing this, you could use this method and get pretty decent looking arrows. But I personally didn't feel the time was worth the end result. And here you can see how it does look more realistic. But again, each arrow took me 10 minutes to do that. All right, so next step is to paint your arrow. So I've actually now attached them to my model just so I don't rub off any paint if I try and transfer it from the corkboard. And we're going to start by painting the fletching here. So all my arrows I'm going to use for this are going to be white. All right, so to give kind of a contrast between, or a highlight to the arrows, I'm going to base this in actually a tan yellow, covering the entirety of the arrow with this. And then I'm going to use an ivory white to kind of paint in individual feathers to give it a highlight. So when you're standing back from a few feet, it'll look a little more realistic. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to paint on the individual feathers as a highlight. So I'm just taking some ivory and just making little streaks across each part of the fletching to simulate those individual arrows. So I'll just speed up the process here as I paint these on, just going quick and easy. They don't have to be exact. You'll be looking at these from a few feet away. And then finally, we're going to paint the shafts of the arrow. I start off with kind of an earth or a beastie brown from Vallejo, and I cover the entirety of the arrow with that as kind of the darkest color. And then I will be going over that color with a layer of cork brown. That's one of the highlights because, arrows are usually kind of a pine color, at least when I've seen them in movies or in real life. So we're covering that with the cork. And then we'll do one final highlight on this model using that tan yellow that we used as a base color for the fletching. We're just going to water that down to almost a glaze and just put that on the top of the arrow as a highlight, like sun hitting the top of the arrow shaft. And here is my finished command base. And overall, I was very pleased with how the arrows turned out, other than a few issues I still have with how I make the fletching. But from a few feet away, it really looks like a dynamic scene. I have my Boromir guy taking a few shots of the chest there. I think it has a very nice look to it. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you all soon.